Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well. And folks, we're going to talk about the 90%. Is that right, Doug?
Well, 90% of species have a recent origin, according to a study that was conducted by some evolutionists.
Right.
And so this is something that is pretty interesting to us as creationists, because basically they've come to a conclusion that they really rebel against and don't like the conclusion that they've come up with, but they can't deny it based upon their evidence.
Right, and of course, as anything that deals with an origin issue, but also has its origin in a secular study, you always have to. There's always a few caveats. Number one, the study may come out and it looks pretty good for us. It looks really good, in fact, in some respects. But the secularists have ways of making you look foolish. For instance, like the Big Bang. Okay, everyone says, "Oh, that's really great. It shows it was a beginning." Well, as far as that goes, it's fine. But of course, their numbers are way inflated. You got 12 and a half billion years ago, which goes way outside the purview of a creationist idea. Well, same thing here, Doug. Even though it's very recent compared to their deep time scenarios, you still have 100 to 200,000 years, so it's inflated. The other thing to do is if they come up with some idea to counteract it, or so you don't want to depend on it. But still, saying all that, Doug, with those caveats in mind, it's pretty encouraging news for us as creationists. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, here's the conclusion of the study, is that 9 out of 10 species alive today have arisen in the last 200,000 years, according to a new genetic study. And the research looked at select portions of DNA. It's actually mitochondrial DNA from 100,000 different species, and the researchers found a telltale sign showing that almost all of the animals emerged about the same time as humans. And not only that, the study also found, rather unexpectedly for evolutionists, species have a very clear genetic boundaries and nothing much in between.
That I liked a lot when I was reading
it. And so these are, totally in line with what creationists expect. And I looked up the article, the original article, and it was interesting that some of the comments that were made on it.
Well, he just wanted to hear. He fought against it. It was a conclusion. He fought against what was I can't remember the doctor's name, but he did not like the implications. They know.
They know that this doesn't help them at all. And one of the comments on the article that said, well, they shouldn't have published this article because now all these nut job creationists are going to come out of the woodwork.
And here we are, the nut jobs. We're back. We're here to let you know we're jumping on this baby because it does have serious implications for their deep time scenarios. Because number one, 200,000 years, even though we believe that's inflated from a biblical time frame, we believe most of speciation would have occurred after about 4,300 years ago, from the time of Noah's flood. Most of the diversity of speciation, the kinds would have been not much earlier, about 1,656 years earlier, based on a biblical timeline, when God created them, with the boundaries in place, Within those boundaries, for instance, we've talked about this many times on the show, within a cat, there's a lot of cat kinds. I'm always interested to find out, are there limitations within the cat kinds that preclude interbreeding between certain, there are now, but what I'm getting is you got a house cat and a lion. Okay, well, they're not going to produce an offspring as far as I know. Okay,
that's right.
They've bred so far apart they can't really breed together. I suppose you could artificially inseminate a lion with a house cat. I suppose if you did it the other way, you'd probably have the house cat explode. I don't know what would happen. It probably wouldn't work. We find out even when you have a tiger.
Chihuahua and a Saint Bernard.
Yeah, that would be problems. But you have even from a lion and a tiger, they're similar in size.
You have liger.
But you get a liger or a tigon, depending on which was the male, which was the female. But they're sterile. The next thing there is sterile. Same thing with a horse and a mule, or a horse and a donkey. You can get a mule, but the next generation, you'll never get a next generation mule. You only get a one generation mule. I've heard, Doug, can you tell me if this is true or not? And I put them on the spot like it's all the time, folks. That's just the way I am. Whether I've heard that the male is the only one sterile, that the female is fertile, but it can only, you know, a mule is not fertile, so she'd have to breed with a horse or a donkey. So she'd revert back to either a donkey or a horse in the next generation.
Right, yeah.
So the female apparently is not sterile. This is what I've read. I don't know if that's true or not, but either way, there are lines even within species. Okay?
Exactly.
But within the kinds, from a cat to a dog, from a frog to a reptile, there are boundaries, and that's what this article seems to be saying.
And those boundaries are something that are quite difficult to define. That's one of the caveats we have, is that we as creationists really can't decide upon, and evolutionists have the same problem. They can't figure out what a species is, or a family, or, you know, they have all these classifications set up, but does the biblical kind actually correspond well with this?
Well, there's a lot of original research being done, really, in I think in more creationist circles, but there might be some in the evolutionary circles as well. But I think that they found, I've loved reading some of the articles when they bred the dolphin and the false killer whale. And the dolphin has 88 teeth, and the false killer whale has 44. And they have called a wolfen, and it has 66 teeth, right in the middle. And there are things, obviously, swimming things would not have been put on the ark. But the idea, there's a snake, and there's a couple other things they've done. They've been able to breed naturally goats and sheep, which I thought there was a line between there. They're apparently they're a created kind, okay? And so there are things like that, but it's still, the point of it is that what they're finding with the species that they have is that they're very recent origin. They, as I say, 200,000 years. For them, that really messes them up. You need millions of years, at least hundreds of thousands of years to have really some of the diversity that they expect it to take. They think it's going to be a long, gradual, random process. And that randomness, Doug, this belies that. Random would not produce anything within 200,000 years.
Exactly.
Not a chance.
There's a creationist author. He's got a new book called Replacing Darwin. His name is Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. I've met this fellow. He's quite the character. He's got a PhD from Harvard. And
Harvard.
Harvard, and he says that, you know, there's a great danger to the evolutionary model in the study in ways that they don't even realize yet. And he added that the study suggests that many species formed contemporaneously with modern human origins.
That's another big one.
And we know that mitochondrial DNA clocks that modern humans formed within the last 6,000 years. Therefore, this study implies that many species formed within the last 6,000 years. And so all the original kinds that were created by God during the creation week about 6,000 years ago, and that means that all the original kinds are the same age, including humans. This doesn't mean that all the species that we have today are the same age. The species are still forming today.
Right.
These species are simply varieties within a created kind. But it does mean that all the kinds are the same age, and we expect most kinds that got off the ark after the global flood of Noah's day, it would have been arisen about 4,350 years from today. So we would expect to see distinct groups of animals that are genetically distinct from.
And this is exactly what they're finding.
This is exactly what they're finding.
Well, it's nice, Doug, that even among evolutionists, you sometimes find a little bit of honesty. Okay, when they do that kind of stuff, there's so much chicanery going on. Sometimes it's hard not to get paranoid, you know, that these guys are going to hide this information. But in this case, they have not, which is a good thing for us. So what else you got here, Doug?
Well, this is I've got a little bit of the original study here, and it says sweeping gene survey reveals new facets of evolution. Okay, so what they've done with this now is. You know, they said, well, we turned evolution up on its head with this, but
again,
and so we've got all these unsettled ideas about how evolution unfolds. And the textbook biology would say that species with large, far-flung populations like ants, rats, humans, would become more genetically diverse over time.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But was that true? The answer is no. It says for the planet's 7.8 billion species, 500 million house sparrows, or 100,000 sandpipers, genetic diversity is about the same. And so the study, the most startling result perhaps is that 9 out of the 10 species on the Earth today, including humans, came into being about 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. So here you got quite a bit of a difference between 100,000 years and 200,000 years.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of slop.
You know, what it reminds me of a lot, what they do is they go, oh, it's kind of like the Ice Age thing, you know, you get stuff down and they go, oh, from 100,000 years or 120,000 years to 10,000 years. They can't go any worse than that. They can't go any lower than that. They just can't acknowledge that. Right. Yet when you find things are out there and you find civilizations that seem to be under the water, which would have formed before the ice, you know, melted and the ocean levels had gone to their present stage. They're on the edges, but they can't go down. Same thing here. The 200,000 years. Well, okay, well, it's 100,000. But the other article said it's born about the same time as man.
Right, yeah.
And then the other thing says the mitochondria was about 6,000 years ago, modern man. Now what they do is they jump in. I still remember this in my son's textbook, and they would have like a half a chapter, or maybe a chapter from all the human, and suddenly you're in the Mesopotamian Valley, and everything is 4,000 years ago. And that's really what's going on. It's really maybe 4,000 to 6,000 years ago that everything develops. And so
you know where the 10,000, 11,000 years came from before the origin of the end of the Ice Age.
Oh, where did that come from?
This came from Charles Lyell, and he was studying the flow of water over the Niagara Falls, and he was measuring it at 4 feet recession every year, and so he figured that it took 11,000 years for the Niagara Falls to cut the
where was it in his day? Where it was in his day. Okay.
And so that's really the foundational cornerstone of evolutionary geology.
Oh yeah, we found that didn't work.
Now, when you go back to 1677, when Father Hennepin came by and he saw the Niagara Falls, he actually made a drawing of what he saw the falls look like.
I've seen,
and that really is something that tells you that Lyell was off.
Lyell wasn't lying, but Lyell was off, by several thousand years, you know?
Yeah, so it fits, and then it's not even taking into account the fact that at the end of the Ice Age, you would have had a massive runoff of water that would have carved the canyon there.
Well, the erosion has been so intense that they've had to shore it up in recent years with cement and concrete so the Niagara Falls would stay where it is. But yeah, when Father Hennepin was out, there was quite a bit farther back. It's eroded a lot farther back since then, just a couple hundred years. So all these things.
Actually, it would be to the north.
To the north, eroded back, but it's eroded back, from where it was, and that'd be good because you can see comparatively the difference between the present and what it was 200 or 300 years ago. But that's the way it is with the speciation, Doug. The same thing's happening. They're finding young ages.
And the ages that they're coming up with are really arbitrarily assigned based upon their own evolutionary assumptions.
Right, exactly.
But even with their own evolutionary assumptions, their molecular clocks are giving them a time frame that's a whole lot too short.
They're giving them conniption fits is what they're doing because they're not liking it,
To explain a little bit about mitochondria DNA, mitochondria contains 37 different genes, and one of them, which is known as COI, is used to do DNA barcoding. And this is what they were using.
That's what they look at, okay.
That's what they were looking at and unlike the genes in nuclear DNA, which can vary greatly between species, all animals have the same kind of mitochondrial DNA, providing a common basis for comparison.
Is that the one where they go through the mother to look at it, or is
Yes,
okay.
yes.
All right.
And it's a lot simpler and cheaper to code also.
Okay, all right.
And actually, it's in a circle. It's
Really?
circular. Yeah, you have a double helix, and it goes around in a circle and
Really?
connects to the other end. And how that actually works is really
I did not know
amazing.
that. I missed that memo somehow along the way. Interesting. So, what is that? Does that have any implications? Is that why it makes it easier to study, or what?
It's just the shape of it. It's something unusual about this particular DNA, that it's a double helix and forms a circle.
Okay, but
So
this is the one they lose.
it's kind of cool, yeah.
So, okay.
So, and then what they're doing is that they take snippets of this and analyze it and try to figure out what the differences are and how they would distinguish between the species. And so they were using this, but this guy Thaler, he says it coincides almost perfectly with species designations made by specialist experts in each animal domain. So it looks like he's using this thing, there's a specialist expert that coded this DNA.
Okay.
And so it says he's actually invoking anthropomorphism or some sort of design in this.
Yeah, they almost can't get away from it, because it does look designed. But so the expert is talking is invoking design.
Right, he's invoking design in this case, and he said that he fought against this whole conclusion all throughout the study. And the only thing he could figure out is that there was some sort of bottleneck back at this time.
Oh, you think? How about Noah's Ark, man? Duh.
Yeah. Noah's
what do you
Ark.
think?
What do you think? So there is a true mass extinction that occurred, and they thought that the mass extinction event was 65.5 million years ago. How they get it so precise, I don't know.
Well, see, they do that. Of course, that's that whole KT boundary. That's where they base all that on that business. All the dinosaurs went extinct and all that stuff.
Yeah, this was an asteroid that hit the Earth,
right.
And they come up with this conclusion. But when you get right down to it, the evolutionists have an issue that they have to solve with this, and I think that they've got to come up with some sort of little hand waving, and
they're going to have to do another ad hoc story. They're going to have to make it up after the fact, because the conclusions they get do not support evolution at all.
What's called a post-diction instead of prediction.
Yeah, it's a post-diction. Yeah, well, they do that all the time.
Yeah.
Usually what they're doing is trying to cover their heinies after they made a blown prediction. Yeah. It doesn't work, so they got to come up with another explanation. Yeah. Like, see, I keep thinking, what I think of that movie Star Wars? These are not the Jedi you're looking for. They're trying to pull this smoke and mirrors kind of thing. This is not the conclusion you're looking for. This long ages is really all it is. Because they find this, and they still don't abandon 65 million, and they still won't abandon 325 million for the Cambrian, Cambrian, Precambrian. They won't abandon any of that stuff.
No.
Well, I read that years ago. There was a book I read called The Devonian Controversy. And the Devonian Controversy was like in the early 1800s. Doug, long before they had any kind of radiometric dating stuff, they already had the geologic age. We knew that from Hutton and Lyell,
right.
And this was actually before Lyell. It was 1809 when I think this book was written. And I have it. If you want to I don't know if you've ever seen it or not, it's called The Devonian Controversy. And it's pretty cool, but they had all their stuff already. And they never abandoned that, Doug, no matter what they come up with. What they do is try to find things that will justify their predictions. But then you get stuff like this, Doug, and there's only so much dishonesty you can use. There's only so much manipulation of the facts you can use. There's only so much after the fact explanation you can use, and none of those are satisfactory to this. They still push the time frame out farther than it needs to be, because Doug, as far as speciation or diversity of kinds, if you will, a penny will get you in for a penny, in for a pound, so to speak. What's the difference between 200,000 or 100,000 and 6,000? In the matter of random chance and selection and mutation and Darwinian evolution, it's nothing. It's a spit in the eye. It's a speck in the, it's a drop in the bucket. It's nothing. It doesn't help them. It really hurts them. So I'm saying, well, as a creationist, I'm unabashedly ashamed to say about 6,000 years ago, things were created individually. There's stasis in the kinds. They don't switch to one kind to another. But within the variety of the species, within the kind, there can be all kinds of variety that can explode. And that happened about 4,300 years ago.
Now, there's a lot of variety that you see within, the human fossils that we find. And you find different sizes, different shapes, but there's usually a very distinct thing to tell apes and humans apart. Apes have the U-shaped jaw, and the human would have a parabola-shaped jaw. And
the cranial capacity is and a human is interesting. As a human has a factor of 3. So as you go from 750 to 2,200 cc brain size, you still be fully human. It's interesting. And that's modern day. Doug, we have dwarfism today, and then we have real tall, sort of almost giantism, so to speak. You get people that are, 7 feet tall, and so there's a lot of variety.
The point I was going to make is that homology, which is finding characteristics that are similar between different species, such as the pentadactyl. 5 fingers, found in a lot of the, from bears to cats to
humans,
to humans, you have this pentadactyl pattern. That doesn't mean that they have a common ancestor. What it really means is that you have a common designer.
Common designer, that's what I always thought.
And it's really as if God, when he was doing his design of life, he had a toolbox of various genetic tools that he used to create his kinds. And so he borrowed from this and borrowed from that, and
we
talked about a platypus.
But we talked about, Doug, depending on the environment, there's going to be similarities. I mean, flippers for seagoing things is more efficient, generally speaking, and if you need hands for grasping, that has a certain thing. If you just need like basically 4 feet for walking and running, hooves or even 3 or 4 fingers is plenty. You might need claws to do rooting, depending on what it is. But the similarities, other things, Doug, of course, we all breathe oxygen. God designed us to breathe oxygen, so there's the lung capacities and the genetics for those would be programmed very similarly. And the environments really are very much. But the problem is that as you said, the evolutionist tries to say, well, the environment dictates how you evolve.
Right.
And no, he said he created the environment, and he already had in mind what he was going to create as far as the kinds. He had it in advance set up. So it's where you're coming from, Doug, in a lot of respects. But these things, Doug, even they're coming from a diametrically opposite point than we are. They still have. They're coming up with things that are really confounding.
The data isn't really lying in this case. You've got to go and deal with the data, and your interpretation of how this data actually works out. That is really where you get an idea of what truth is.
It's the old data. It's the old adage. Was a Grand Canyon formed by a little bit of water over a long period of time, or a lot of water over a short period of time? Right. We favor the latter because it seems to make more sense, and it seems to correlate with the stuff like Mount St. Helens flood, the Spirit Lake business, and other places that we've seen, almost like laboratories. Everything, Doug, it correlates to a young Earth. There's nothing really out there that really contradicts the biblical framework, Doug, of about 6,000 years for creation, with a bottleneck about 4,350 years ago, and speciation from all the continents have happened from that period of time.
Yeah, we've heard all the arguments from the evolutionists, which we've answered them according to what we see scientifically as a good explanation for it. So I don't see any obstacles. If someone really wants to believe in God and to trust God, there's no obstacle from our point of view scientifically that would prevent you from doing so. The only obstacle that you might have is your own silly will, not wanting God to rule your life. And
Well, Huxley himself, Darwin's bulldog, made the comment, it's not that creation isn't a viable theory, it's just that we sexually want to live the way we want to live. And I find out, so Doug, oftentimes, in whether it's sexually or whether it's other things, you want to live in rebellion, that's a decision you have the right to make. But the fact is, there's nothing out there, and you can bury your head in the sand, pretend the evidence is not there. And we're not going to tell you the evidence is going to convince you one way or the other, but if you have an open mind, you might be able to be convinced of a different scenario. Come at it from a different point. If you're willing to come to the Lord, and take His words at face value and say, look, this says it this way. I think there's nothing real, and we're just, Doug and I are here just trying to remove obstacles.
right, yeah.
That's really what it is. Okay, we are unabashedly creationists. We're unabashedly Christians, and that we come from that viewpoint. We admit that. Evolutionists generally come from an atheistic viewpoint, not always, but many times you have to do a lot of convoluted pretzel theorizing to make things work in a long-age scenario, and as well as a biblical one. So I'll leave you with that. Anything else, Doug?
Well, I hope you enjoyed our show tonight.
Good.
Take a look at the study. It's kind of interesting. I think you'd take a look at it from the Answers in Genesis website, as well as the original research, and see what you think. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.